Welcome to our second edition of Live with Love. This one I'm coming to you from Minnesota. This almost didn't come up because I'm in the hinterlands and the Wi-Fi is a little sketchy, but here we are. Hey, Julie.
So you had these crazy, awesome pictures of you on what lake is it? There's like you're land of a thousand. You're land of a thousand lakes. So which of the 1,000 lakes were you on with all your high school friends, looking like you were having an awesome time?
Okay, well, let me correct you. It's land of 10,000 lakes.
Oh, 10,000 lakes.
There's really 20,000.
Okay.
And that was not a lake. That was the Mississippi River.
Oh.
That I grew up on the Mississippi River. So my best friend from growing up here bought her family home she grew up on from her parents and redid the whole thing, to update it because we lived there a gazillion years ago. And she has a pontoon, which is what we did. Like, that's how we grew up. We fished,
awesome.
Water skied. And I hope as kids, we weren't drinking as much wine as we did the other night. But yeah, it was really, I saw my 6th and 7th grade boyfriend.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Have you seen him since, wait a second. You kept the relationship going from 6th into 7th grade?
Pretty
much.
Was
that committed? Wow.
It was my hot blue 10-speed. I think that he lived in my neighborhood, and I would get on my blue. I think it was Guess. No, Guess wasn't around yet. Maybe it was like Esprit. Remember Esprit?
Are you kidding? I used to love Esprit. I used to beg my parents. I wanted 2 things in life. I wanted the Big B Benetton sweater. Do you remember those sweaters with the big B on it?
Yeah.
Desperately wanted them. They were expensive. My parents got me like a knockoff, which was not as cool as the original. And then I wanted it in Esprit rugby because Esprit had these awesome rugby shirts that I was dying for. And I don't know if I ever got that.
So I think it might've been that. And it was like satin. It was shiny and had a jacket and pants. It was very hip. And I would ride up the street because he lived 2 blocks away. And I would ride up the street, go visit him. I've seen him. I saw him at our 30th high school reunion when I was pregnant, and no way, that wouldn't make sense. 20th.
Okay. Did you get the butterflies
to see him?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, both times. He's such a nice guy. He still lives around here, but and the funny thing is, we're friends on Facebook, and I'm friends with his wife too. And she came, and I was like, please oblige me tonight to just have fun. I know it's probably weird for you. I mean, we're all friends. It's just not a big deal. But
so you had a lot more happening in 6th grade. I was actually thinking about this. There's a boy in the 7th grade named Jack Halpern, who I was like completely like, your first kind of crush, and it kind of came upon very suddenly. And I couldn't even look at Jack Halpern. Like, I could, like, physically, I could not even look at him. I was just like, my face would go red. The heartbeat would go crazy, and I would go insane. And Jack Halpern could not have blown me off anymore in life. Wherever you are, Jack Halpern, you broke my heart. But now I just have a son who just graduated the 7th grade. And I realized Jack Halpern wasn't being a jerk to me. Jack Halpern could not have cared less about girls. And that's why he was blowing me off, because I look at my son now and like, he could not care less about girls. And there's this one girl who's really into him from camp. And every so often we see her on the street, and she's always like, hi, Zach, to him. And he's like, hey, and keeps walking and completely forgets about her. And I keep saying to him, you understand, she's running home right now, and she's telling all of her friends that she ran into on the street, and she's super into you. And oh my God, he kind of looked at me this way, and what's he thinking? And was he really into me? And meanwhile, you could not care less about her, and you keep walking. And he's like, huh? I don't get it. So he's like the Jack Halpern of this relationship, because I'm that girl, and it breaks my heart because I know exactly what she's doing. She's completely running to her friends and dissecting every aspect of running into him on the street, not realizing that he has completely forgotten about her by the time he crosses Broadway. And it's very, very sad.
Well, so anyway, I guess girls are a little bit more mature at that.
Yeah, for sure.
Probably all the way through high school. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. I'm coming back to New York this afternoon. So anyway, we were going to talk about a story that was happening with X, formerly known as Twitter.
Yep.
Linda, is it Baccarino? She was running
Yes.
Elon Musk. And then she was, she lost her job last week. But the interesting thing was, did she or did she not have to sign an NDA on the way out the door? And I think we have a video snippet of some of this.
Yeah. Maybe not. Well, while we get that up, here's what's so interesting. I don't know where she's based. If she's based here in New York, which is where I think she came from, then yeah, I think that she probably has to sign an NDA. But if she was based in California, where I think X is based, unless Musk moved to Texas, she can't sign in California. She can't sign it. There's no non-disclosure agreement, which brings to mind this very interesting question. Why are there different rules for different people, right?
Right.
Like, effectively, she is not even remotely supposed to be under an NDA if she was in California, but that's crazy. That's insane that if you live in California, you have more rights if you're Linda Yaccarino than if you live in Texas or you live in New York. Although Texas just passed a great law to get rid of NDAs for sexual misconduct, but that's not, I assume, what you would be alleging. But her reputation's kind of destroyed and she can't get it back because she probably signed an NDA. That's the part that sucks, that she can't tell people what was going on. I mean, she defended Musk to the hilt on some of his really crazy stuff, destroyed what was apparently a sterling reputation in her industry, and now is probably incapable of getting it back purely because of the fact that she is bound by an NDA, which I think is it's insane. It's
yeah,
crazy.
I think she might actually be based in California because didn't she work? She was part of the whole tech world out. Or no, she at NBC before. Yeah,
she was at NBC. That's why I think she was in New York. So I think she might be, but wherever she is, I don't know where the contract is, probably in Texas or California because that's where X is. So if X is still in California and she's bound by California law, regardless of where she lives, that's a great question. Linda Yaccarino, if you're listening, which I don't know if you are, but if you're in California, there is no NDA that you're bound by. Go ahead and, the minute you say that you want out of your NDA and file that with Twitter or X, you can talk.
Yeah. And by the way, we should just point out that there are 3 states where you don't have to abide by NDAs: New Jersey, Washington State, and California. We're working to try and get that done in New York and Connecticut at the moment as well. But people aren't going to tell you that law is passed. Companies aren't going to tell you. We hear from people all the time who think, we hear from reporters who are writing stories and they don't know that these laws have passed. So we're just using this story as an example of how our work is helping other people, but a lot of our work is educating people on the laws that have passed, et cetera. I now know where the video was. It was for our other topic we were going to talk about.
Right.
Speaking of train wrecks, hopefully we are not in the middle of a train wreck right now with screwing up what we were supposed to talk about first. But I was watching this documentary a couple weeks ago called Trainwreck, and then it's like a 1-hour thing where they focus on a different topic each week, I think. And this one was about the downfall of, speaking of esprit and clothing, it was American Apparel. I don't know if you remember that, Julie, back in like the 2000s, early 2000s, it was like the rage, and they were they were pressing the limits in their advertising, and it was very, kind of was like bordering on very sexual, and some people claimed porn. But it got the attention of young people, and it was just sort of comfortable leisure wear. But the guy who founded it and ran it was like an alleged serial harasser. And it was interesting because when I got to the end of it and these women started speaking up, all of a sudden our issues came out. Even back then, it was like, well, wait a minute. We can't really talk about any of this because we signed NDAs and we signed something called a forced arbitration clause, which meant that they couldn't openly go to a jury to sue him. They had to go to the secret chamber of arbitration, which is what we fight against. Yeah. Now I think we have the video of their lawyer talking about that.
Every time we got a bonus or a promotion, or anytime our salaries changed at all, they would have us sign a mediation agreement that said, hey, I've recently been offered more money, and that means I can't sue Dove I can't talk about anything negative about the company. Maybe I was naive, but I'm sure it'll be fine. I'll just sign.
Back now at 8:14 with a woman who is suing the CEO of American Apparel for sexual harassment.
I don't want to keep a secret about this, and especially when I know there might be others out there like me.
Initially, it was one woman that led to a second. One of the biggest issues in filing these lawsuits was that all the women that signed these agreements, they thought that this was the norm.
Yep. And that's more than 80% of all American workers are these women. And it's not just for sexual harassment. It is for everything. And you sign these arbitration agreements the day you walk in the door. You don't even know sometimes what you're signing. As this woman said, you just sign. Sometimes, and we have examples of this, you get an email from your company saying, click on this email. Of course, you click on it because it's from your company. And by clicking on it, you're bound by an arbitration agreement. And the courts it's insane. I know it sounds insane, and people probably listening are like, wait, how can this be? It's apparently legal, and it happens all the time. And if you are in the American workplace, more than 8 out of 10 chance that you also have an arbitration agreement, whether you know it or not. Yeah. We got rid of it for sexual misconduct. People should know that. So if this story had taken place today and not when it took place back then, these women would not be bound by arbitration at all. And it's a good question as to whether, they can make the case that potentially they can get out of these arbitration agreements. But it just applies to sexual misconduct. It's a monument. I mean, this is all Gretchen Carlson all the time, that you walk the halls of Congress for 7 years to get this passed, or 5 years, and you passed it. And amazing that you were able to do that. And sexual misconduct is huge, but it does apply just to sexual misconduct. And so, Gretchen, it raises the question that we always talk about. Let's say you're sitting in a cubicle and your boss is sexually harassing you, and in the next cubicle is a Black woman who the same boss is racially discriminating against, because we know there's a tremendous overlap. The woman who's being sexually harassed can go ahead and speak out publicly and file a public lawsuit and hold the predator accountable. So he may think twice about doing it because he knows it's possible that his name will be out there in a public lawsuit. The woman who's racially discriminated against, she's got to keep her mouth shut. We are creating a completely bifurcated system here where some people have more rights than others when it comes to these issues. And it's crazy. And it's time for Congress to change the law with respect to everybody else. We're working on that with age now. Age discrimination is our next move to try to get rid of it for arbitration for age discrimination, completely prevalent in the workplace as well. People should know that. But, we need to, unfortunately, we need to keep working at it one protected class at a time, because Congress will not do it for everybody, which is tragic, I think. I mean, it's not right.
Yeah, well, and we should be clear that we didn't choose age discrimination as the next thing to tackle after we accomplished sexual misconduct. When you work with Congress, as you can imagine, in this hyper-political time, you have to do what both sides think they will work together on. And quite honestly, in this, in our issues, it's Republicans who are harder to get on board. And so our chief Republican, who's been very helpful, suggested age discrimination is the next one. So it's not like we chose age over race, or we chose age over gender, so there's a lot of protected classes that we still have work to do on. What I thought was also interesting, though, from that clip back in whenever that was, 2006, 2007, was that that big case, even though it was, there's a lot of news coverage about it at the time, did nothing to move the needle on people becoming educated on forced arbitration, right? And so you fast forward 10 years, when I came forward in 2016, that's what really kind of, from the work of all these other people who had been fighting arbitration, but it was hard to get traction because people don't know what it is and they don't get it, right? Yeah. It's kind of funky. I always say it was a perfect storm to actually accomplish something on this, because there were all these people who had been working on it, but you needed like even more high profile cases to really get the attention of Congress and other people to get it done. So I thought it was a really interesting documentary. It reminded me about all those stories that had happened. And to your point, those people in 2025 would not have been silenced, and it probably would have been a much, even bigger deal than it was at the time.
Yeah. Look, what's heartbreaking about this is these documentaries keep getting made. These stories keep getting told. And every time somebody hears the story, they're always shocked and they're always like, how can this be? This is absolutely awful. Not realizing they're probably in the same boat. And that's the part that I think is just crazy.
Yep.
Not right.
People, by the way, this is an open forum to be able to put a question into the chat, ask us anything that you want. Oftentimes when we do these, we hear from people who are in situations or have been in the past, or just want to learn, like what could possibly happen to me at work, and why should I care about these issues? Okay, the documentary highlights how promotions and bonuses were weaponized to keep everyone quiet. Can you talk about how that plays out across industries and how NDAs have become a currency of silence? Yeah, I mean, look, companies learned like 40 years ago that they could use forced arbitration to keep their dirty laundry secret. And we always say that it was really after the Anita Hill hearings. People watching are old enough to remember that, which was the early 90s, where sexual harassment really came to the forefront, and companies probably thought, well, we should maybe do some training on this. But at the same time, in closed quarters, they were probably saying, holy crap, how can we make sure that if we have something like this at work, nobody ever finds out about it? And that's when arbitration started appearing in contracts, and it just exploded over time. It was never the intent of arbitration. Arbitration was supposed to be like small business disputes with your neighbor to unclog the courts, not for human rights violations. So that was really the beginning of the explosion. The NDA side, Julie, if you want to talk about that, I mean, that NDAs were originally for companies to protect their trade secrets, which we agree with. But then they exploded into covering any kind of bad behavior that happens at work. Never the intent.
Yeah, I mean, we always say this. Look, if you, and I use this analogy, if you know the secret formula to Coca-Cola, you should not be able to walk it across the street to Pepsi. Coke spent, I don't know how long, years, decades, perfecting that formula. It is proprietary to them, and nobody should have it because that's their business model. If everybody had it, we could make our own Coke at home and they'd lose, obviously they wouldn't have a business anymore. All of that makes sense. But if you are being harassed or discriminated against by the CEO of Coca-Cola, and I use him as an example, there's no evidence whatsoever that he does that. But if you're being harassed by an executive at Coca-Cola, you should be able to speak out about it, and they shouldn't be able to shut you up. And the problem is that a third of all American workers, at least, are bound by NDAs at work. And so what that means is on the very first day of work, sometimes before you even get the job, you sign documents that say that if anything happens, you can't talk about it. It's never positioned as a gag order. It's never positioned as even an NDA. You might have something in your contract that says confidentiality provision. Or potentially it could be in your onboarding document without even a contract. And so that's the problem. The problem is that you are always and completely silenced about anything that happens at work. And that means that if you are sexually harassed, hypothetically, you can't talk about it unless, and this is where it's important, we passed another federal law in December of 2022 that says that if you are sexually harassed or assaulted, you can talk about it, provided that it is a pre-dispute conversation. What pre-dispute means is going to be up to the courts to decide. We think pre-dispute means before you actually file a lawsuit or file a complaint with the EOC. But having said that, unless you live in California, Washington State, or New Jersey, you really can't talk about it freely. And that includes not just sexual assault and harassment. It includes retaliation. It includes discrimination of all kinds. So that's another huge problem. I mean, it's something that I think is really important for people to understand, because you may be one of the 3 people in the workplace, if not more, who are silenced about things that are happening to you as well. And that's something else that we're working on very, very hard that we can do at the state level. So if you live in the state of Connecticut or you live in the state of New York, we're going to ask you to please, and I mean please, contact your legislators, contact your assembly person or House member, contact your state senator, contact your governor, and please tell them to pass the 2 laws that we have, one in each of those 2 states, Connecticut and New York, that would get rid of NDAs for all toxic workplace issues so that you can bring your state in line with New Jersey, California, and Washington State. You guys, New Jersey got this done. New Jersey got this done. New York State has not gotten this done. Come on, New Yorkers, really? Like, you're losing out to Jersey here. Connecticut, you're so close. You are so, so close. You have great legislators who are working so hard on this issue. You have the Urban League that is behind our bill because they understand that racial discrimination is used to cover up bad behavior with NDAs. So please, if you live in Connecticut or New York, please contact your state legislature, contact Governor Hochul, contact the governor of Connecticut, and please, please tell them they have to support this legislation.
Okay. One last quick question.
Yes.
If we can see, you both talked about how common it is for people to sign these agreements without realizing what they're giving up. What would you say to someone watching right now who's facing that same pressure? Yeah, there's a sort of old school theory in our culture that you sign an NDA so you get paid. So in other words, you get paid something for your silence. We actually did a study in New Jersey after they were the first to get rid of NDAs, and turns out that even though you could, if you wanted to, talk about what happened to you, most people still choose not to because they want to continue to work because they're probably going to be penalized against, which we're working on, but changing culture is tough. But our study showed that people were still getting settlements even though they could talk. So it sort of was counterintuitive to this age-old theory that you, the way America works is if something bad happens to you at work, we'll give you $1 and then you have to say you'll never ever talk about it and you sign an NDA. No, what we proved in New Jersey was you can still own your voice. Most people won't speak up to go tell the world what happened to them at work because they want to work again. But it's the power of knowing that they own their own voice. And by the way, the company is still doing these settlements at the same amount of dollars. So I guess our advice is you need to be educated, first of all, about what state you live in. And then your lawyer and you need to know that you can say, I'm not going to sign an NDA. You don't just have to fall into that trap.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say this, Gretchen. I actually did that. So I mean, it's hilarious. Somebody who was in New Jersey sent me a contract. I live in New York, but the contract would have been bound by the laws of the state of New Jersey. A few months ago, sent me a contract that had exactly the same onerous language that we use as an example when we testified in Congress, when we did a press conference on the Hill to ban NDAs in New Jersey. And I called them back and I said, I can't sign this for 2 reasons. One is, I don't know if you know what I do in my non-spare time, but what I do in my life, but I fight against these laws. And I was one of the people that was instrumental in making sure that this kind of language was banned in New Jersey. So not only are you asking me to sign this contract in violation of New Jersey law, but now that you've given it to me and I said, no, you can't not hire me because I refuse to sign this contract. That's also in the law. So you're bound to now hire me. And they were shocked. They weren't trying to be clever about it or trying to screw me in any way. This was just, and they said, this is just typical language that our lawyers include. And I said, well, your lawyers don't know about the law in New Jersey. Your lawyers are willingly telling you to violate the law. And the funny thing is, I didn't sign it, but how many other people did? Because they don't know what I know. And
Totally.
and that's, you know, that's the problem. And again, I think if you kind of, it really depends on your boss, right? Or your prospective boss. If you politely say it, then they may not even be aware and you're doing them a favor. But of course, there are other bosses who make you sign it for reasons that are nefarious. And do you really want to work in a place like that anyway?
Yeah, I think it's 50% people not knowing about it, even lawyers, even HR people, and 50% hoping they can still get away with it.
Agreed.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, guys. And this is perfect timing because my computer's about to die. I think I'll be back in New York next week for our chat. And we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Until then, have a fantastic week, everyone.
Bye, everybody.